And then I got really interested in food and what we were eating. The light bulb moment then, it came on because I suddenly realised if I can get my own immune system healthy by eating the right food, surely a plant's immune system will be exactly the same. And that's when I become obsessed, for want of a better word, of growing a plant without using fungicides, which I don't use fungicides, I don't use insecticides, I don't use growth regulators, I don't use P&K fertiliser, don't use lime anymore, use very few herbicides or no herbicides. I try to do it all in the heartbeat of Mother Nature because nature's got all the answers. I always think this century has to be the biological century. Last century was the chemical century. And it doesn't matter where I speak in the world, I see the chemical system failing again and again and again. People are still hopeful that magic bullet's going to come out of a can, and it's not going to happen. It's done. We've done so much damage with it to our own health, to the planet. It's time to wake up and smell the coffee and become farmers again. In 2012, I started to play around with biology. I'd read a book by Neil Kinsey called Hands-on Agronomy, and that was my first discovery of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And as Nick said just in his previous talk, we've got so much nitrogen in the air that we breathe. All we need is a healthy working soil with the right biology to convert that nitrogen. Why buy it when you can have it for free? And I've proved that time and time again. I grow milling wheats, canola, spring malting barley, spring beans, spring lupins, spring oats. I have grass in the rotation for haylage because we're so close to Wolverhampton. We've got a brilliant equine market. It's a great carbon sequester which gets rotated around the farm. I've grown wildflowers for seed. Wildflowers are so important to our indigenous pollinators. They don't recognise a lot of the modern plants that we're growing. They need those original wildflowers. I am in the mid-tier, I am in the SFI. I joined the mid-tier when it first came out because that was just at the time when I was starting to grow cover crops. Everybody was saying they wasn't going to join and they were willing to pay for the cover crops. It was a no-brainer for me. I thought I'm going to get in this easy because nobody else is going to bother, and it was perfect. And then I could get my margins all around the farm to get my pollinators, to get my predators. I could get corridors. Now I don't need them because the whole farm is alive. But back in the early days, I think it was important. It's all about getting that ecosystem working and getting everything flourishing. You can see from that slide how we've depleted our carbon, and I agree with Nick, nitrogen's played a massive part in that along with deep tillage. And it's something we've got to restore. People often say to me, how the hell are you achieving what you're achieving? Well, it all comes down to carbon. Carbon is the food of life, and that's what it's all about. You get the carbon working, get the carbon back into your soil, feeding that biology, you'll get the results. If you've got a dead soil, you'll never do it. And I've seen it fail time and time again where people try and run before they can walk. You've got to earn the right to do this and you've got to put the work in. And the more input you can give, the more you're going to get out of it. But it's not easy. It's a high management system. But the rewards are through the roof. Why would you not want to do it? When you see your whole farm working, you see that ecosystem working, you see all that bird life. When I'm crop walking and you see skylarks getting up 10 to the dozen, it's just, you can't help but smile. And that gives you those endorphins in the brain because that gives that feel-good factor. And you can't buy that. It's priceless. To know that what you're doing is right, you're farming in that heartbeat of Mother Nature, you can't buy that feeling. And to see that the bank account's improving, the whole farm's improving, what's not to like? Why would you not want to do it? But you've got to understand what you're doing. And that's where a lot of people have failed. I think one of the worst things the government did was giving grants on direct drills because people were going out, buying them. They didn't quite understand what they were doing. They were still trying to farm conventionally. And then they fall flat on their face. But then they tell everybody it doesn't work. You're going to lose all your money. But the reason it didn't work is because they didn't understand what they were doing. And that's what makes the difference. It works anywhere in the world, from high rainfall to low rainfall. Farmers make it work. We're a resilient bunch. And we make things work if we're determined to do it. But if you're not doing it for the right reasons, you'll fail because you're looking for the excuse to give up because you're only doing it because you think you should be it to save money or be it for whatever reason. You've got to firmly believe in it. And I always use the analogy, it's like swimming across a river and you start to get halfway across and you get a little bit tired and you start to look back at that bank behind you. Don't look back, just keep reminding yourself why you're doing it, why you've got to improve the carbon in your farm, why you've got to get everything working again. And keep looking at that bank and where you're going to get to and be determined to get there because that's what makes all the difference. Carbon is life itself. You can see how many billion tonnes of carbon there are on planet Earth. We can't make any more. This is all we've got. Most of it's stored within the Earth's crust, and you can see how much is in the atmosphere. Carbon is everything. It's what makes up a big 40% of us. It's huge. Carbon is everywhere. We can't live without it. It's learning to work with it and learning to understand how we've depleted our soil so much with the farming practices we've been taught to do. It's nobody's fault, but it's time to wake up and smell the coffee and start and farm for ourselves and make our own decisions, as Nick alluded to a little bit this morning. Quite often when I'd be giving a talk earlier on in my career doing this, there'd always be somebody at the end and they'd come up and they'd say, Tim, I love what you're doing, but my agronomist says it won't work. I'd say, well, change your agronomist. I can't do that. He's a family friend or she's a family friend. I said, well, if they're a family friend, they'll understand your decision and respect you. But 9 times out of 10, they're only your family friend because they've connected with you so well. They've got in there and you trust them 100%. But when you're not paying their wages, quite often they won't ever come and see you again. Some do, some are genuine, but some aren't. And what's happened in my experience, the agronomist tells the farmer when to plant, what to put on it, when to harvest it, when to sell it. Who's the bloody farmer? It's all about coming back and making your own decisions. And that's the biggest thing about this, is making your own decisions. Why am I putting that on? What's it going to give me? How much is it going to cost? Am I going to get that reward? People often refer to me as a low input farmer, and I hate being called a low input farmer. A low input farmer in my mind is an untidy farm that's not being farmed very well, and it's just an excuse to get away with it. I will spend money. If there's a need, I'll spend money. But what I want to do is get that maximum amount of yield without spending the least amount of money. That's always been my objective. But if I've got to spend money, I'll spend it. I won't think twice about it. If I can see there's a genuine reason I need to spend the money. But I'm buggered if I'm going to put it on just because somebody tells me to. I want to make a decision of why. And that why, as Nick went on this morning, is so important, and it's questioning why. Why are we doing it? And quite often you're treating the symptom rather than the cause, and that's, to me, exactly what a fungicide is. We're all harvesters of light. Photosynthesis is everything. That's why it's so important to keep that soil covered. Keep that plant photosynthesizing. There's nothing more sad, I don't think, than some of the August and September and seeing fields that could be harvesting light and they're not. That's when we get those cover crops. And for me, after the first week of August, every week that cover crop is depleting because we've just got less and less light to get it going. But that process has been going on for millions of years, as we know. But it's such an important process. That's how we're going to feed our biology. That's how we're going to move forward. Who is really in charge? I really do think it's biology that's in charge. It was here before plants. I think biology invented a plant to harvest that carbon and get it back in. It took it a couple of attempts to get it right before it came up with a brilliant way of storing carbon. And then along comes the human race and decides we're going to dig it all up. Again, nobody's fault. It's just evolution. But I think Mother Nature will always win. I think, the human race is like a virus on the planet. Everything that I see on the planet, perhaps apart from wasps, has a role to play to improve the planet and move it forward. The human race just seems to be the opposite. We're just so destructive. And we've just got to start and be the observer more and work in harmony with what we've got, rather than having the arrogance to think all this went on for millions of years to create this wonderful place. And along comes the human race and we'll take it from there. We know what we're doing. We didn't know what we were doing. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. It's nobody's fault. But it's just time to start and look and see what we're doing. There's a really good book by David Montgomery, Dirt, and in it it'll explain how every civilization on this planet has failed because they didn't look after their soil. And we're on that path because it's a 100-year process and we're on exactly that same path. But nobody's alive can see what the soil was like 100 years ago to see how much it's deteriorated and the damage we've done. But the knowledge is there now. There isn't the excuses not to do it. All living organisms need carbon, as I've already spoke about. Most plants do fine at 50 to 80% potential. 50%, most of them are wheat crops that I see. When you get a plant up to 80 or 90%, that's when you see that plant thriving. You see that wax on the leaf, that plant is healthy, its immune system is working, everything is going just as Mother Nature intended, and that's what I'm always after. I always see every crop on the farm as an athlete, and I just want to take it to full potential and get the best out of it, working with the best of the knowledge I've got It's what I call what I do intelligent farming, and it's not a big-headed thing. It's just using the best of science to make an informed decision about what we're going to do and why we're doing it. And that is the big difference. And it's all about turning that sunshine into liquid carbon and putting it down to those exudates, getting that carbon back into the soil. And that's what we are as farmers, in my opinion. That's one of my cover crops back in December 23. There were still pollinators working there, and it was just a joy that day. It was a nice warm day. You can see, as I say, we were still photosynthesising, the soil was covered, fantastic cover crop. I hadn't applied anything to that particular cover crop, but if a cover crop's gone in late or poor conditions, I would apply Citadel, get it going, because it's just an investment in the bank. You're going to get that return back by having that cover crop. To do nothing, as we saw those poor pictures this morning, as Nick put up, it's just a waste of time. You're not achieving anything, but a little bit of food, you're going to get it back. You're just going to cycle it. You're just investing, you're putting money in your own bank account, and that's what carbon farming is all about. Is putting money into that bank account and getting that bank account up to a level. It's another one of my cover crops, which we had tissue tested just to see what was going on. And then that's restoration by cover crops, but you can just see the value of that cover crop from what we had there. I know back when I started growing cover crops back in 2012, people just couldn't get their head around it. What a waste of money. You'd be better off leaving the money in the bank, you're not getting anything. And it's lovely to see how it has all turned around, and I'm driving around the country, you see cover crops everywhere, but it's still that worth investment, especially in the early days when you're starting to get your soil cycling. That cover crop needs a little bit of help sometimes, but it's just an investment. It doesn't need much, but it's just growing a good crop rather than just chucking the seed on, I'll take the SFI payment, and not doing anything to improve what you could. They're already paying for the seed and the drilling, and a little bit on top, in my opinion. So why not just enhance it and use that money to get that full potential cover crop, because you're going to get the money back tenfold. Another cover crop that I grow is beans, rye and veg, and I've got some sheep in there. The other thing, I try to pick cover crop mixtures by families. I want to get as many different family plants within that cover crop as I can. Different families give you so much more to the soil. They feed the soil in different ways. They feed biology in different ways. So if I can get up to 6 or 8 different families within a cover crop mix, I'm happy. I don't tend to graze my cover crops anymore, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute on another slide. But that particular year I did. It was a good cover crop, and that was the readout from that one. Again, you can see how much money there is in that cover crop and how important it is to have it growing there, so that nutrition is still working, still being cycled and ready for the cash crop. And again, it's why I wouldn't ever think twice about investing in that cover crop by putting something on to make it better. As I said, I tend not to graze cover crops anymore. I still think grazing's got its place. If you've got an infected wheat crop, brilliant, graze it back, get rid of the disease, let it grow again, it'll tiller out, you'll get a better yield. If a cover crop was too big and I thought it was going to cause me a problem with carbon lockup, then yeah, I'd probably look at grazing it. But the problems I had with the 2 dry years we had, where I'd grazed a cover crop compared to where I'd crimped the cover crop, I'd got a crimper roller made by Trevor Tapping again, which works really well. Where I'd grazed it, and I only ever graze 2/3, I always leave 1/3 for my underground livestock, otherwise you're depleting root size and everything for that cover crop to get growing again. Where I'd grazed it, I did put 2.5 tonne of beans to the hectare. Where I'd crimper rolled it, I was doing 5.5 tonnes to the hectare of beans. Massive difference. And it was all to do with keeping that soil covered, keeping the temperature low, retaining that moisture. And right from day one, you can see those beans coming through there and how they looked as a final crop. It worked exceptionally well. I don't think sheep grazers pay us enough the amount of nutrition they take away with them as a sheep. It should be £1 per animal a week, not bloody 30 pence. I normally get about 50 pence, but it's still not enough, but I've done the calculations for the amount of nutrition they're taking. But remember, I'm mimicking nature, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. I'm brewing up biology and putting that biology back that Mother Nature would be doing through those animals. So it's understanding what you're trying to achieve. You can see on the right there, the organic matter test I've done with the Farm Carbon Tool cutting kit over the last 5 years. I wish we'd have gone deeper with our trial, because we use GPS, so we were going back to the same square metres in the field every year. and testing the different horizons, but we should have gone down to a metre. One of the probably the best experiences I had a drain block one spring, and I was drilling the field and I thought I've got to fix that, so I went and got the digger and dug down, and as I got down there I was down to about 1.2 metres, and the archaic worms, the real deep burrowers, they'd got carbon motorways going down. It was just black of carbon going down, and that's the difference, the amount of carbon we're going to store right down there. It's not just the top, and that's what nobody alive can see, the amount of carbon. People often say to me, oh, do you think you'll get carbon overload in your soils? No, because it's just going to go deeper, it's going to get cycled deeper, and that carbon bank is going to be there as storage for when I want to cash in on it. The soil analysis on the left, that's just showing after 10 years of no P&K, you can still see my indices are up there. As Nick said, I had a big problem with the cover crops releasing too much potassium, and potassium was getting too high. We were all getting concerned about it, but the offtake of the haylage, we maintain them, we're keeping it down, but it just shows the power of biology when you've got a working soil, what can be achieved. I first moved to zero tillage in 2015. I invested in the 750A. Probably one of the most terrifying things I did when we first got the 750A was take the gas torch to it and start and cut it and weld it to what we wanted. Horrible feeling, and I always remember Mike had introduced me to Trevor Tappin, and I was sat in my office waiting for Trevor to turn up, and I suddenly thought, I don't know this guy, and I'm letting him loose on the drill. What if he can't weld? What if he's rubbish? I thought, I'll reassure myself. I'll phone Michael. I said, Mike, have you seen this guy's welding? You know, what's his work like? And the phone just went deadly quiet. I thought, if his welding's crap, within 10 minutes he's gone. I'm not letting him loose on my drill, because I haven't got OCD, I've got CDO. It's got to be perfect. I thought, it's not good enough. It's just the way I am. But fortunately, Trevor was a fantastic engineer. He designed the liquid system. I came up with the pipe that dropped it into the seeding furrow, because I wanted to brew biology. I knew what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to put that biology in the seeding furrow, and I'm a firm believer every problem can be overcome. We just need to think about it. It's just taking the time, and I had many a sleepless night getting over problems, but they can all be resolved. That's what farmers do. We think about things and we come up with solutions. So I've got the rear hopper there that I can broadcast seed or nutrition, fertiliser, whatever I want to do. One of the main reasons when at 2015 I'd got every type of brome going on the farm. It was getting out of control. I'd been strip tilling up until that point, and it was a real problem. So I was using I can't remember the granules for Avidex granules to try and help control the brome. I'd got the front hopper for companion cropping. The flag isn't there for on Patreon. It's just a simple way. I went around the Space Centre in London, in Leicester, and I was quite bemused to see that the Americans had spent millions and millions of pounds trying to develop a ballpoint pen that would work in space. The Russians just used a pencil. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can do this as cheap as your budget allows you, or you can invest as much as you want. It doesn't have to be, and that flag's just there to see if that fan's working. It works really well. I've got row cleaners. I was having a problem with oilseed rape because my combine doesn't spread the chaff very well, that I was getting acidic conditions behind the combine. The row cleaners just sweep that chaff out the way. It's just like a brush. It's quite very important to set them up, and it takes a bit of doing, but by setting them right, I'm not moving any soil. I'm just sweeping that trash out the way, and then I'm getting good soil contact, got over the problem. People often ask me, what are you going to modify your drill again? And I only modify the drill to get over problems. If I've got a problem, I'll think about it and I'll get over it. Every problem can be resolved. We started off with a diaphragm pump, as Trevor Tappin designed, which worked really well. And then I went and got better at brewing, and the filter with the diaphragm pumps, I was unblocking them every 10 or 15 minutes, which was driving me crazy. I said, Trevor, we've got to get a better pump. And Trevor designed a peristaltic pump, which is just like the kidney dialysis machine. It's a very gentle squeezing action. It's very kind on biology. It doesn't destroy or kill the biology. And I can pump as dirty a liquid as I want down there. Pure molasses, not a problem. It copes with everything, so I'm keeping all that biofilm, putting it down in the rhizosphere exactly where I want it. I do a lot of brewing. Nick normally puts it in his talk that I'm addicted to brewing. He slipped today and he didn't mention it for once. But I am addicted to brewing, he's quite right. But as I always say to him, what's it going to cost me, £3 a hectare? That's to buy the BioPlus tea. I also make my own compost on farm, so I'm putting as much biology back into the soil as I can. I see the soil as just one great big stomach, and I'm a big follower of a doctor called Tim Spector that's done an awful lot of work with identical twins, where one twin will be obese and one twin will be perfectly healthy. And it all comes down to the gut biome. But the only way you can change our gut biome is to take some poo from a healthy person and insert it in the unhealthy person. Which sounds gross, but it's the only way. Soil to me is exactly the same. Where is all this biology going to come from? People will say to me, it'll come back naturally. Maybe it will. But I'm an impatient bugger. I haven't got time to wait. I just want to introduce as much as I can. If it's not meant to be there, my goodies will take care of it. It won't thrive and it'll crash out. But I just want to introduce as much biology as I can. When I started to heat the water, I suddenly had the light bulb moment that everybody likes to be warm when they're reproducing. I heated the water to about 18 degrees, and all of a sudden I'd got a brew that was just out of this world, and the biofilm, it's just like mussels hanging off the string that's going down to the aerator within there, and it just changed everything again, which is why I had to move to the peristaltic pump. I do make my own compost. I do Victorian composting. I tried Johnson Sue, but it was always too wet at the top, too dry at the bottom. It's a lot of compost that you couldn't turn, you couldn't keep control over it, and I think you've seen a lot of that. I mean, it just doesn't work as well as it should, does it? Whereas the Victorian composting, 2 foot high, same principles, always 12 inches away from air, so I'm getting a really healthy compost. I can control it, I can use it, I don't need much to brew up and inoculate the farm, so I'm just reintroducing those microbes all the while as much as possible. I also try and make fungi compost where I use leaf mould, and that was one of my composts, and the IBC, the seal had gone on the tap, which I was cussing about at the time, but I filled the drill up and I was coming to the end of the day, so I just let it drip. When I came back, you can see that fungi was growing. That was only an hour and it was growing. But that just proved to me what a fungal compost I'd made and how I'd knocked the spores off that organic matter. Because I do a lot of compost extracts as well, where you just knock the spores off, you use a lot more compost, but you can introduce a lot more biology into the soil, because you have to be a bit careful brewing up a compost, because you could be brewing up baddies. So until you get good at making composting, you hope you know what you've got. I'd always advise doing a compost extract, because it's a far safer way of introducing those microbes. And you can see all that fungi growing on the top there. That was just overnight. And it just shows the power. I always like to prove what I'm doing is working. I never do anything without trialing it and trialing it. If it's something I really want to work and it hasn't worked, I'll trial it again. But I always got to prove to myself that it's going to work and it's worth the investment of time and money to bring something to the farm. I'll also brew up protozoa. That's organic lucerne hay. I brew that up for 24 to 48 hours. Protozoa eat bacteria. They're after the carbon, so they don't use much nitrogen. So for every 6 bacteria they eat, they're chucking out 5 molecules of nitrogen. So I'm getting that free nitrogen from there as well. So it's all the while using the best of Mother Nature to improve what I'm trying to do on farm. That was a couple of years ago. A friend of mine invited me shooting, and that was his farm on the right. He's a conventional farmer. He'd like to change. He's got a lot of debt. He's very nervous. So he just watches what I'm doing, tries to learn, but doesn't change. But that was similar days, and you can see all my riser sheaths covered there with soil. That plant is working already. It's putting sugars, carbs out, amino acids. It's feeding biology on the rhizophagy cycle. Everything is working. My friend's farm, bare roots, drug addict soil, nothing working. And it's quite reassuring to see when you look at somebody that hasn't even started on the journey and see those bare roots and realise how far you've come. Because it's always, and you're doing it and looking at your farm every day, you take it for granted. You think everybody's farming like that, and they're not. And when you see an improvement like that, and you see that aggregation in your soil and how it's so aerated, you know, I can just push a finger in my soil. It's just the porosity is so good there that it's breathing, it's alive, it's thriving. And that's the difference where you go to a conventional farm, high cultivation, it's just as flat as a pancake. There's no life in there, it's just dead. This is from a few years ago now. Nick talked about it a little bit this morning. So it's the same seed. I'd bought some new seed in. I always asked for it to be undressed. I do get it now, but those days they'd say they'd send it undressed, but inevitably it'd always come with the dressing on because they couldn't be bothered to switch the dresser off, and they wouldn't charge me for it. But that's not the point. I want it undressed. You're just defeating what I'm trying to achieve. But it was a really good trial because the stuff on the right is my own seed with my biological drench down there. The stuff on the left is the bought-in seed with my biological drench, but because that fungicidal dressing was on there, it couldn't connect with the seed, it couldn't work, and that was 10 days difference in germination, and you could see that line all the way through the growing season. That's the damage that seed dressings do. And I always have my seed tested to make sure there's nothing too bad down there, but if I had some fusarium in my seed, I'd just put trichoderma down, it would gobble it up. If I had some bunt, trichoderma. Nature's always got the answers. It's just using the best of biology to get what we want out of it. Always save my own seed. I'm a big believer in, can't think of the names, go on, yeah. No, saving your own seed. Epigenetics. Big believer in epigenetics. That plant will always be improving itself to go back into that environment where it's just been grown. It's no different to us. We always want our children to be better than what we are. And the plant is exactly the same. It knows what it's had to compete with in the growing season. It equips that seed with the right endophytes to go into that environment to cope with them again, and it's always improving. My seed mix now, I've got a 4-way mix. He's about 8 years old, and for me, it's just getting better and better. I always do a seed wash, so whatever seed I'm drilling, I'll have a compost tea bag full of seed, so I'm trying to knock those endophytes off that seed and brew them up. So my brewer's got so much going on down there, I just want to give it the best chance. And when I trialled this, I could see the difference in the size of the plant. There was more endophytes working, feeding that plant and getting things going, so everything gets a seed wash that I'm drilling. Selenium, another big one. I take selenium myself. You can see the benefits of selenium there. It works really well. It's really good for our own immune system, which is why I always take it. Such another big one that's often overlooked and so important. And you can see it's big on fusarium. It's all the things. People will often ask me, what is it? What's the secret to what you're doing? And I couldn't give you one thing. It's not just silicon. It's everything in my mind. If you just do silicon, it could work, but it's jigsaw pieces of putting the whole puzzle together so as we get everything to the right levels. And it's all about balance. Once we've got that balance, that plant's immune system is right up there. It's through the roof, and it will look after itself. It doesn't need a fungicide. I think one of the biggest jumps I've had is stopping using insecticides and stopping using fungicides. And the first year I didn't use a fungicide, the massive difference was the residue, because I'd chopped the straw. The residue just disappeared. Within 3 weeks it had gone. Where I'd used a fungicide, it was still lying about because you've put that barrier there. You want that saprophytic fungi to start and break that down, to take the lignin out of that straw, and it just can't because you've put a barrier there. And then you've got that black straw, as Nick was on about, because it's not processing, it's not working, and you're not cycling those nutrients. You've interrupted the cycle of nature. And that's why it's so important to always think about what you're doing and what are the consequences to what you're doing, rather than just taking the easy way out. For me, chemical farming, I could do it at the farm office. Just look at the calendar, look at the weather. I wouldn't be far wrong with timings, and it would work. To farm like this, you've got to be out in the field. You've got to look at what's going on and make an informed decision. Guttation, the plant will feed that biology on the leaf. It puts sugars out there. I do an awful lot of biological applications of natural fungicides with Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus amyloid-methacean, and I will do compost teas as well. And the plant will look after them. It's how it's meant to be. I can always remember Nick's face when we were at a meeting and the agronomist was giving a talk on Revistar, and he was so proud that Revistar was going to strip all the wax off the leaf. I thought Nick was going to stand up and hit him. Once you've taken that wax off, you've got no protection. There's nothing left to protect that biology. That leaf is open. It's going to get fungal attack all the while because you've destroyed that immune system. You've destroyed that wax. And when you see microbes growing in the growing season, they'll shine. Just like a dog that's been fed good, that coat just shines. Plants are exactly the same. That wax is there. It's protected. It's looking after itself. It's photosynthesizing. We're getting those sugars down into the ground. We're getting that liquid carbon. Everything's working. I think I've already covered that one, really. It's exactly what I've already said. But high analysis fertilisers, fungicides, it does the damage, and that's little and often with fertiliser if you've got to use it and if you're not quite there. Herbicides, again, I don't do any pre-emergence herbicides. It's normally just some Broadway Star in the spring, which sometimes I question that now. It's more of an insurance policy. I think one of the best moments, Nick had come and walked farm, and he says, "You've got a bit of brome in that one field." He said, I should get that sprayed before it gets any bigger. And he came back 2 weeks later. "You got it sprayed?" "Well, then with the weather," and I hadn't sprayed it because it had been raining ever since. But because it was a fungal soil, it just wasn't the right environment, and it just died. It didn't need spraying. The leaves had gone yellowy red. It was just dead on its feet. And even Nick was smiling that day, wasn't you, Nick?
Oh, no,
Are you awake?
More of a grimace, really.
But that's the difference when you've got that environment it's not comfortable in. I've got areas on the farm, my fungi to bacteria ratio is about 2 to 1 on most fields now. And I've got areas where I can't grow oilseed rape. I'll keep drilling it, but it won't grow because it's just the wrong environment. Oilseed rape is an early succession plant. It can't cope with those high fungal soils. And I've drilled them 3 times and it just sits there and looks at me. It's the wrong environment, I'm not growing. But it doesn't worry me because I'm moving it forward, and I'll just grow something that's in tune with what my soil is doing and where I am. And that's being the observer again and understanding what you're trying to achieve. That's from where we first started using Bacillus subtilis and Bacillus aemoliquafaciens. Brown rust on the left, untreated, and treated on the right just with Bacillus subtilis, and we can do that for what, £4 a hectare? What are people spending on fungicides now, Mike? 200, 250?
The biggest amount last year, I think, was 250 a hectare.
And did it work?
They couldn't get on at the right time, and we've only got preventative approaches now, so it's too late.
Yeah. It's if I had to, many a time Nick said, "Oh, I don't know." That's where sap testing comes in, and I see what the nutrition. Make sure you're everybody awake. Somebody's got to rattle your cage. It's also really good on fusarium, as Nick said, and again, where we trialled, where it was untreated, I'd got 36% fusarium, where I'd treated, I'd got 0.2% fusarium. Most fusarium fungicides are, what, 60% efficient? Do you agree? 50%?
Yeah.
Again, why would you invest in that when you can have every paper you read on Bacillus subtilis, they're 90% efficient. It's all just been swept under the carpet and never shouted about. It's just a balmy situation because by doing that, I'm not carrying that fusarium over in my seed to regrow and respawn it. I'm eliminating it and getting away from it. Another hero of mine, Bruce Ames, the triage theory, and he spoke about this for years. If the body is short of nutrients, it just does short-term survival. Plants are exactly the same. We've always got to be thinking of that long-term survival and making sure they've got the right nutrition. So as their immune system, if we want that top yield from that plant, we want that nutrition to be balanced, but there for the long term, not just the short term. And he's proven it's exactly the same in human beings. Another really good book by Fred Presenza, Nourishment. And one of the real take-home messages in there was a lady in there that was a scientist, but she also ran an orphanage. I think she had 36 different foods for 16 children or something like that. But she just proved that children pick different foods. If it's whole food, they know what their body needs and they eat the food that the body needs. And that's the damage that's been done to us with processed food. We're given false nutrition and the body doesn't know anymore what food it needs because we're not eating that whole food. I always say if you're reading the label on the food, you've already picked the wrong food up. It needs to be wholesome food that you're cooking from scratch, and people have lost that ability. But that book proves how important it is and how all the children were at peak health, but they were all eating totally different diets because their bodies needed different nourishment. And it's still the same now. You know what you need. If you get a craving for something out the garden, I know a friend of mine because I'm a keen gardener as well, and I used to give him some cabbage basically, but it was the posh cabbage. And he said his daughter had never ate cabbage before, and he tried to feed her the same cabbage from the supermarket and she wouldn't eat it. She knew her body needed it, and that's the difference when you've grown something that's in tune with the soil. It's getting all those nutrients that it needs and it's nutrient rich. That's the difference. And I use the word nutrient rich rather than dense because dense is black. I did a talk for the Food Ethics Council and they were all really wow what I was doing. But they said, Tim, we can't use dense, that's just too dark. Nutrient rich is alive, it's vibrant, and that's what our food is that we're producing, and that's what makes the difference. It is a live product. It's full of biology, which is going to go into our gut and improve it and improve our bodies. I do an awful lot of sap testing, so I'll sap test every 10 to 14 days. It is a lot of work, as Nick said, but I want to know what's going on within that crop. Without knowing what's going on, you're just guessing. I try to get nitrogen as low as I can, and I need to know what's happening. I need to know what that plant's got, as otherwise it's going to cost me in yield. If I haven't got the right nutrition, it's going to get diseased, in my opinion. So I need to know. So that's the SAP test, and then that's where we've rectified a lot of the things a couple of weeks later. And it's what we're always working towards by making that informed decision. I'd still like silica a bit higher on that one, but it's something we're still struggling with, even though I'm using high rates. But we will get there. And the other beauty with SAP testing, you can make sure that the products you're using are actually working. There's a lot of products out there that are full and leaf test, in my opinion, because they coat the leaf. So you think you've got enough there. But with the SAP test, you can't hide it. It can't disguise itself. And that's why I love working with Flex. Flex is so available. It always goes into the plant and you always see a difference. And that's what the SAP test will show to me, which is why I love Flex fertiliser.
Have you managed to take your nitrate levels down to zero?
Does it say so? It looks like it, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Nitrate's the deadly one. If you've got nitrate high up there, if it's high, you know you're going to have pest attack because you've got weak cells. And the foliar feeding I use Trinity and M-Growth. We get them a mixture together, and we've had fantastic results feeding through the leaf doing it that way. But it's a regular one for me. You've just woke me up there. Yeah, it is a regular one for me to have no nitrate. I do a lot of my applications at night. The phone would stop ringing at night, so I was left in peace. The humidity would be right, the temperature would be right, nothing is worse. I'll use nicknames again because he'll see it and he'll go, oh, they're doing it again. To have somebody out there spraying at 23 degrees in bright sunshine, it's not going to go into the plant, it's just evaporating. If you're using biology, the UVs are probably going to kill it. You're not going to achieve anything. You're ticking the job off, and it's a lovely scenery in the afternoon, getting it done. It's nice and warm. You've got the air conditioning on, and you get to go home at 5 or 6 o'clock. But you haven't achieved anything by doing it at night. Most plants do 80% of their growing between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. By getting that foliar nutrition on, it's ready for that plant to absorb it. Stonemates are open. It's straight into the plant. It's doing the job, and I'm getting maximum use out of that foliar treatment. And that's what I want to do. So we'd say with the right lighting on the sprayer, I quite enjoy spraying at night. It's peaceful. Always re-energise my water. There's a really good book called The Fourth Phase of Water, which explains the different phases of water really well. But by re-energising, the plant will absorb it far quicker. It takes that nutrition in with it far better, and it means I get better results. So all my water is re-energised. This is a slide I nicked off Mr. Woodjat. You can see he's got his cucumber there ready to batter me. Nick's already talked about silicon, so I won't go over it again, but you can just see the importance there of how we're trying to improve that cell wall strength and stop that fungi penetrating that cell wall. Calcium is king. Very overlooked nutrient in my mind. People look too much at pH for calcium, and it's got bugger all to do with calcium. pH is measuring the potential hydrogen or measuring the protons within the soil. Calcium is a totally different thing. And calcium is so important. I always do soil applications of calcium, and I'll follow up with foliar applications of calcium so as we're getting it at peak to make sure that plant's got enough. I can't emphasise enough how important calcium is and how it's been overlooked. Wood vinegar is another one of mine that I absolutely love. I think we've probably got the best charcoal maker in the country with us today, Matt, sat here. And Matt will explain, just talking about charcoal, the difference with home-produced charcoal to the cheap stuff that's imported from the rainforests, where they put an anti-inflammatory on it when it goes onto the ship. They cover it in petrol to make it burn again when it comes off the ship, and then you wonder why you get horrible tasting food. And the difference between a good charcoal and a poor charcoal to cook your nice grass-fed beef steak on is just, difference is phenomenal. And a lot of people just don't realise the difference in potential of a good charcoal. It's a natural producer of wood vinegar because the woodland he's using, it's naturally regenerating. Matt's just helping it do that. And from producing the charcoal, we get the wood vinegar. I've had fantastic results with wood vinegar. I started off with Rhizoctonia in my lupins. It cured that one for me. It's really good on Phytophthora. But it's also been really good on septoria for me. But again, I can't emphasise enough that it's used within a programme and not just used on its own. And it's a very good preventative rather than cure. I think with everything, if you've let it go to a real bad stage, the crop takes a lot of bringing back. But it can be done. I have done it. But it just takes more work. That is a powdery mildew slide on a cell wall, and you can just see how it's putting that enzyme out to try and break down the wax down to get within that plant. And it's something Nick and I have seen when we started using silicon. Our yellow rust would try and come into a plant, and you'd see it on the edges trying to establish itself, and it just could not get established. The cell wall was so strong, it couldn't penetrate. It was trying its best, but it just, you'd see the odd spore here and there, but it just could not get established because it couldn't get through that cell wall. We'd got so much wax there, it was strong, the plant just shrugged it off, don't bother me. That's just the amount of pressure that spore's putting onto that cell wall to try and get in. And that's 2 days growth, fungal growth. Don't know how many days it is before it starts to sporulate, do you, Mike? Yeah, so yeah, it would be, I would sort of say it would be sporulating now. I think you can actually see it on the cell, it's starting to sporulate, so it's established, you've got a problem. And that's just that enzyme has left where it's tried to get into that cell wall and how hard it's tried to work. I like companion crop in my wheat, that's some crimson clover. I was doing that before the SFI came along. I've always wanted to get a nice dwarf white clover understory all over the farm, and I've achieved it in places but not in others. But it's always an ambition of mine. I think if we can get that dwarf clover, it's just, the soil's always covered, we're always fixing nitrogen. There's no reason for anything else to grow, so everything's working, or there shouldn't be any reason if we've got a healthy soil. I try not to use herbicides, and some years I do get away with it successfully. That was a few years, well I do it every year, but that was a few years ago. But it's just showing what can be achieved once you've got that soil working and there isn't the need for plants to start and germinate, to repair that soil, once you've got a healthy working soil, because all plants are trying to do a job. And that's why it's so important to be the observer and understand what that plant's trying to do for you rather than just going out there trying to kill it. That plant is working for you. Mother Nature is saying, I always remember when I started zero tilling and people would say, oh, you'll get rid of your weed bank. I don't want to get rid of my weed bank. That's my toolkit to tell me what's going on. To be the observer, to see that soil is telling me what's happening. All I have to do is copy and try to improve with Mother Nature. If it's short of calcium, I might see some docks, I might see dandelions, I might see thistles. It's understanding what's happening and what that plant is trying to pull up and repair itself. Couch grass, I see that a lot in permanent pastures where people aren't farming their grass, and I see soils going back in grassland farms probably quicker than arable farms because people think the grass is doing everything, it's capturing carbon and doing, which it is, but sometimes it also needs management. And so I see a lot of couch grass coming in, and my answer would be to direct drill a herbal lane there and get things working, and that chicory will be pulling up calcium and doing the job. All plants, you know, we've got the arsenal at our fingertips to do the job that Mother Nature's trying to do, to take our soil forward. And it's never it's a never-ending job. We'll always be working to improve our soil. You can never sit back and think, oh, I've got there. There is no there. It's a constant job, especially with the weather, with our maritime climate. We're always up against it. That's just some of my hay that we've made. I always treat my grass the same as every other crop, so it's tried to sap test and foliar feed to, again, keep it at peak performance. That was some spring malting barley, just grown with Citadel, organic amino acids. Yielded exactly the same as the crop we'd foliar fed, with 50 kilos of soil applied in. I wasn't expecting it to yield more, I was just happy that it yielded the same. The grain was a lot bolder, we didn't have the dust in it. It's the difference it makes by having that healthy food, and you don't need anywhere near as much energy when you're feeding amino acids. The plant has to convert that nitrogen into amino acids, which takes a lot of energy. When we're just applying amino acids, we haven't got that problem. I always remember the guy that looks after the grain store for me, and he said, can't you do the whole farm with that? There was no dust, there was no small grains. And it was just a revolution for him. It was just made his job so easy, and it just shows the difference by having the right food there for the plant. Nitrogen is our best friend and worst enemy. I just put that in to just show what other countries are doing and how insignificant we are compared to China. It uses an awful amount of nitrogen at such a high cost. I think people will be buying products on the size of their carbon footprint in the future. I think the end user will dictate that to us. So I just put that in just to show the difference in the carbon footprint of different fertilisers. But I can see that being a big one going forward. With Green Farm Collective, we're already being asked for carbon neutral regen produce. It's coming whether we like it or not. I think it's going to do a lot of good with our farming methods. It's going to change things a lot quicker than what I thought would happen. So I'm all for it. That was a crop of winter wheat a couple of years ago. The field on the right was grown with Citadel. The side of the left picture was 50 kilos of soil applied N topped up with foliar nitrogen, probably about 28 litres. Yielded exactly the same. Nick and I spent hours and hours comparing the two. We could never see a difference. If anything, the heads looked bigger on the Citadel side. But it might have been 0.2 or something like that higher yield, but it wasn't anything that I'd jump up and down on, but it doesn't matter. The fact I hadn't used that nitrogen, I hadn't got that carbon footprint, I'm not using that nitrogen, so I'm not going to have the problems that nitrogen brings, was all what I wanted to do and the way I wanted to go forward. The crop of wheat of mine, that was grown with 50 kilos of soil applied N, about 28 litres of Trinity and M-Grow mixed together. That came in at 12 tonnes to the hectare. It was weighed before anybody asks. It was doing probably 13 and a half on the combine. But there's always somebody normally says, did you weigh it? But it was just a joy to combine again to see what can be achieved. It's my best field on the farm. I can't do it everywhere. But that is my probably highest carbon field on the farm, and that's what makes the difference. And it looked fantastic all the way through the growing season. It did go down in places because there was just too much nitrogen there, but it just shows what you can achieve by fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere. Pardon? Protein was about 11.5. It wasn't fantastic. It's something I'm still working on to get the protein right. But for a yield like that, and I'd sold that forward at £300 a tonne, who cares about protein? Really, you know, if I'm totally honest, I'm really not bothered. It was a good year that year when prices went through the roof and I sold it forward, and yeah, how can you not make money at that, you know? But we're in different times now, but my production costs are still very low compared to John Nick's or anything, you know, I'm right down there. This was that same year, but it's a couple of years ago now, but it's just showing the savings I'm making from farming this way. And those prices would be out of date for where everybody was last year, but I was a bit tied up in bed last year, but hopefully moving forward. But it just shows it's the savings where I make the biggest gain, and anything else, I think yields, as long as I'm around that 10 tonne, I'm quite happy. I can make good money at that. And that's just the machinery passes and the savings compared to where we used to be. Planted spring barley, 20 kilos of soil applied N, 18 kilos of foliar. Soil applied will always be ammonium sulfate. I think that's kinder on biology. It stimulates the nitrogen fixing bacteria from everything I've learned. So I always put a bit out there. I'm not at the stage where I could just get away with it. I've tried, but it doesn't work the same. It is a lot of work, foliar feeding, not for the faint-hearted. It's just what you're trying to achieve, really. It's to have an easier life. I think we'll probably be up to 120 and then start on foliar feed. But I can achieve that, but it's an awful lot of work. It's foliar feeding. If it's a bad year and I'm having to feed a lot, it's, you know, I'm going every 10 days. If it's a good year, then I'm not. It just depends what the weather's doing, how much moisture I've got, whether that biology is working properly. But I can achieve it, and so for me, the rewards of farming that low with nitrogen just come into their own, and it's well worth the work. Nutrient Cancor oil, that's what I've found for yellow rust. The difference is magnesium. If I get magnesium, I will always get yellow rust. Septoria again. So I had a problem with low chloride with not using the MOP. My chloride levels have dropped, so one particular field, I had to put some chloride on to get those levels back up, but it worked very well and had an instant result. But that's what the sap testing is really good, because it'll just tell me what's going on within the plant and what I'm short of. And that's why I'll put the work in to sap test every 10 to 14 days. It's once you get in the routine, for me, it's not a problem. I'd normally get up at 5 o'clock, be out there and gather my results, and they'd be in the post for 9 o'clock. I get the results back on Tuesday. And I know a lot of people have had trouble getting stuff through customs, but I've only ever had trouble once. Other than that, I've never had a problem. I use the bionutrient meter that Dan Kittredge has developed just to see the difference in the polyphenols within the wheat and within carrots and food. And it's just fantastic to see the difference of food produced off a working soil. And that's Dan's slide, and you can see there 1 grape could be equal to 15 grapes. That's the difference of a working soil. And that's what we're all, to me, that's the way the whole market's going to go, and we'll be rewarded for growing that nutrient-rich food in the future, because the consumer will have a device that will measure it and will choose the best food, and the supermarket may have already done it and price it accordingly. But that's the way I see, because having the right food for improving our health is what we're all going to be seeking as our knowledge base gets better and better of the difference that food can give us of our own immune system and our own health. And that, to me, is what being a farmer is all about. And that's why we should always be applauded and praised for what we're doing, because nobody else can do what we can do. And yet we still seem to be being kicked and abused, and it's just wrong. People haven't got the understanding. When they're saying they're importing food and we don't matter, they're importing crap, as Nick's talked about already. They don't even realise what they're buying, and the carbon footprint on that food is through the roof. What are they achieving? Oh, you can't see that. John Baker says ploughing is about 20% of damaging gases into the atmosphere. Nick might start mumbling at me over that one. But I did a trial with Wild Farmed a couple of years ago where we compared glyphosate to tillage. I did 4 plots, so where I use glyphosate, I always use citric acid, fulvic acid. I always put a bit of molasses in to feed the biology. And then I did another one just with straight glyphosate, another one with my stewarded glyphosate and tillage, and then just straight tillage. Where we did straight tillage, the porosity went through the roof. The amount of air in the soil where the tillage was, but then after 6 weeks, it just went flat as a pancake. I didn't harvest a crop there because it just was overcome with weeds, for want of a better word. Where I'd direct drilled and I'd crimped the cover crop, I'd got a perfect line of lupins. Clover was coming through nicely. And what we found, yes, glyphosate inhibits the biology, but it didn't destroy it with me because I'd got good biological soils. So for me, glyphosate to destroy a cover crop is still the best option. You know, I remember the days when we were having to burn couch grass roots to try and get rid of them. The plough never cured it. Without glyphosate, we'd soon be back to that on a lot of soils where the soil isn't very healthy. So to use glyphosate that's stewarded, so we've also proved how quickly it broke down by having the stewarding in the biology there. It broke it down really quick. So I had Severn Trent came out and tested our water a couple of years ago, and they tested a number of drains, and they said, God, you could drink this. This is pure. And she couldn't get over it, the lady testing it, because she'd never been on a farm where it was coming out so clean. And it's just the difference that what the soil does. It's that filtration system. It's making all the difference to what we're doing. I'm totally dead against using glyphosate to desiccate a crop that's going into the food chain. It's too dangerous to think we could spray a crop and within 4 weeks it could be in our bread and we could be eating it. It's just wrong. And I think, you know, to keep it, we need to steward ourselves and not use it willy-nilly. Same as I always use the analogy, if you've got 2 plates of sandwiches, one's got all the active ingredients of all the fungicides, all the growth regulators, all the herbicides, and then you've got my plate of sandwiches which has just had nutrition. I know which sandwich I'd be picking, and I think 90% of people would be exactly the same. It's everybody's got to be more responsible for their choices and value food. If you went back to the 1940s, I think the average household was spending 36% of their income on food. We're down to 7 and 9% now. They don't value food at all. And that's the difference. It's gone because they just treat it as a commodity that we need food. I'll have some of that. But they're not thinking about what they're putting in the bodies and what it's doing to them and how unhealthy they've become from it. I do have my own website, Tim Parton Farming, where Nick helps me as well, and we just try and help people on their journey. I'm also a co-founder of the Green Farm Collective. We were lucky enough to win the Farming for the Future prize a couple of years ago, or a year ago. That's where we're down there collecting it. We started out as a group of farmers, being 4 farmers, to trade carbon and natural capital. And now we're moving more into selling certified regenerative crops, which we use FIA for as our assurance to actually guarantee that it is what it says it is on the tin. And we hope to give the farmer a £20 premium over their normal return. We also want a carbon neutral produce. That's my carbon footprint. I think it'd be a lot better than that once I redo it, because Trinity's moved on from when I did that one. But you can see I've got carbon to sell there. Personally, I don't think carbon is high enough value at the moment. I think it needs to be more around that £100 a tonne, which it's getting there. I know Neil spoke about it this morning. At £100 a tonne, I might look at trading it. It's so valuable, and it's such hard work to put it back into the soil and to be assured and to actually guarantee that it is there. It deserves that high price. That's just our regenerative agriculture outcome framework. We're also hoping to start and trade wool this time, regenerative wool, to give a return on wool to sheep producers. So that's one we're just moving into as Green Farm Collective as well, which so will actually put a value on the fleece rather than it not being worth shearing. I'm really dead against the way the government is just shoving solar panels on productive land, be it grassland or be it arable land. We should be covering all our roofs in the inner cities first. Every build that's happening should have solar panels on. We should not be taking land out of production. And then they import our food and they're giving themselves a pat on the back saying, look how bloody green we are. And we're nicking the food and resources from another country. And what's going to happen when that country hasn't got any resources? Or we fall out with them. You know, we're so close to war all the while within the world. It's just balmy, and it's something that has happened before. You go back 100 years before the Second World War, the government was doing exactly the same, and they still haven't learned. And it just winds me up, and that's just the food models of importing our food. I don't think the food production, I think that's on the meat one, is just on high factory systems rather than regen systems, but it's just an indicator of that footprint and what's happening in the world. That's another good one. You can see the size of a Sunday lunch from the 1940s to where we are now. Cheap food to me hasn't achieved anything. It's just made an unhealthy society. The food that we're producing is very low in nutrition, so the body is wanting more, so people are eating more. There's no value on food, and it just hasn't achieved its desired effects in my mind. It's just made people not respect food. And not give it the respect that it deserves, and they're spending their money on other stuff that they don't need, and that's the result with obesity, and then it costs the health service an awful lot of money, and we're just going backwards. People need re-educating. I always have a passion for bird life on farm, and I had an entomologist come in and do a survey, and I always remember that day I showed her around the farm thinking she would survey the whole farm, and the first margin, which was the corn marigolds, she went about 60 yards, and that was as far as she got, because she'd never seen so many insects in her life. And I'll never forget the smile on her face when she came back, because she didn't believe farms like this existed, and that was just music to my ears. And it is, the whole farm, when you walk, there's birds everywhere, everything is alive. My worm numbers, I have about 37 per square fork. They're doing all my cultivation for me, they're recycling all those nutrients for me. My infiltration rates, I'm about an inch every 37 seconds. And when I was 7-8 years ago, I'd still be about 6 minutes. It just shows how different the soil's come on. And you could really see it this back end, because Michael Kavanagh, who was doing the drilling for me, he could travel on my land before he could travel anywhere, because that infiltration rate, the soil would carry him and he'd be out there when he couldn't drill his own land. And it just shows the difference of a healthy soil and how you can get out there and start things working. But you have to earn the right. It doesn't just happen. And that's why I use the analogy of swimming across the river. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes input, but the rewards are well worth it. Healthy soil, healthy people, healthy planet. Let food be thy medicine, and let medicine be thy food. Thank you.